Welcome back, Cubs. Direwolf here. And today, I want to talk to you about gun control. The debate about gun control is rooted in the question, should we have the right to bear arms, and why do we have the right to bear arms now? The left always revitalized the debate after a huge tragedy to try to use the tragedy as an emotional appeal to why there should be more gun control. They usually don't ask for a straight-out ban of firearms, because they know most of America would not be okay with that. So instead they try to make incremental changes by slowly banning some firearms or accessories at a time. Their strategy is to play the long game and move towards a complete gun ban like they have in some places in Europe and Australia. Many hardcore leftists, such as Hillary Clinton, have praised the Australian gun ban, despite it only disarming the law-abiding and emboldening criminals. What is important to note when you're debating the left about gun control is, none of the measures they wish to take, none of the laws they wish to pass would have prevented the tragedies that they're using as a motive for passing those laws. You're only taking away firearms from people who follow the law, you're not taking away firearms from those who do not follow the law. No matter what law you passed, murderers will murder, thieves will steal, and many of them will use firearms even if they are illegal to possess. No matter how many times they trot out the family members of victims of gun violence and parade them around as a justification to ban firearm ownership to law-abiding citizens, it will not stop killers from killing, but will stop people from being able to defend themselves and turn them into potential victims. Without a firearm, a 90-pound female is very unlikely to ever be able to defend herself against a 250-pound male assailant. But firearms are the great equalizer, and that 90-pound female can defend herself against an attacker or a rapist if she does have a firearm, even if he has a firearm. Many on the left would say it is the job of the government and police to protect you. But what they don't seem to understand is when these attacks take seconds to occur, police are minutes away. One reason why a lot of people fear and hate guns is because the left-wing media, instead of teaching gun safety, often demonizes guns and gun ownership. Recently, the ladies on The View tried to do just that. They tried to demonize gun ownership, as well as take a few shots at Trump for supporting gun ownership. But funnily enough, the guest they happened to have on knew quite a bit more about gun ownership than they did, and was able to help correct some of their misconceptions. I'm going to share that clip with you now, because I have quite a bit to say about it.
When Trump tweets about Chicago, and he says that there were 228 shootings in 2017 and 42 killings, up 24% from 2016. That is true.
Yes, that is true. And you know what is also true is that Chicago has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the entire country. I love when the left bring up Chicago because it is a great example of how their policies do not work. The gun laws in Chicago are so prohibitive that very few people own legal firearms in Chicago. If what the left believed was true, then there would be less gun violence when there's less legal guns. However, in reality, Chicago has the most gun deaths out of any other city in the United States. In 2015, 473 plus people were killed with guns. And in 2016, it went up 48%. Over 700 people were killed with guns, out of 3,500 people shot. In Chicago, 93% of all homicides are committed with a firearm, and the vast majority of these homicides take place in poorer neighborhoods and to minority groups, who do not qualify to own a firearm thanks to the restrictive laws or cannot afford one. These laws hurt the poorest and weakest among us. And this is a trend for all the big cities that are run by Democrats who have restrictive gun laws, like Detroit and New York. They all have high crime and high gun violence rates, despite having very restrictive gun laws.
But I don't think he is addressing the real problem, which is we need to reduce gun violence.
What he's pointing out is your attempts to take away firearms from law-abiding people has not reduced gun violence. In fact, it's made it worse. He's suggesting you should let anyone who has no criminal background and is psychologically healthy own a firearm so they can defend themselves and their families. Criminals care about self-preservation. They target people who they believe are weak or unable to fight back. They are less likely to victimize someone if they think it's possible that that victim might have a gun and might shoot them. Trump is suggesting that legal gun ownership is the answer to the problem.
And so if he were talking about that kind of policy, I think that would be very important. And Representative Gutierrez issued this statement. He said, when the president wants to work with states and localities on public policies to reduce gun violence, he will find partners in cities like Chicago.
If you want advice on policies on how to lower gun violence, the last people you should be asking are the government leaders of Chicago. That's like partnering with wolves to discuss how to better take care of sheep.
But I think he'd rather spend his time on Twitter.
Well, since the liberal media refuse to fairly represent him and spend most of their time slandering and misrepresenting his statements, you've forced him to use new media to communicate with the people directly. It is the only way he can communicate with us directly without the deceptive, regressive leftist media lens.
And that's really it in a nutshell. I mean, we need to start talking about carnage, real policies that reduce gun violence.
Well, they believe the more guns you have, the less violence you'll have. That's what they believe on that side.
And this former federal prosecutor will tell you it's not true.
I don't care that you're an ex-federal prosecutor. It doesn't make you an expert on this topic, and it doesn't give you the permission to tell me that I cannot defend myself, my family, or my friends' lives. And I do believe putting more firearms in the hands of the right people will reduce crime and defend the currently defenseless.
You're arming people who are law-abiding citizens, and those people who have guns that are criminals are going to get them anyway, and you want people who are law-abiding citizens to be able to counter criminals. Chicago has the strictest gun control laws, some of the strictest gun control laws in the country, and they have a ton of gun violence.
Exactly. This is the only intelligent woman sitting at this table.
So you agree with that?
I'm a pro-Second Amendment girl. If you're a law-abiding citizen and you make it through your background checks, I want you to be able to
defend yourself.
You just said the key.
Nearly everyone, including gun owners, agree with background checks because we want to make sure that firearms are going to those who have no criminal background and who are not clinically insane. But I do not believe that this system should involve registration because I know one of the first steps in removing firearms from a populace is to first register who has firearms so it's easier to take it from them. It was the first step the Nazis took, and it was the first step the Aussies took when they both disarmed their people. The government doesn't need to know how many guns and bullets you have as long as you are a law-abiding citizen.
And he said, listen, there's a lot of us down here, but don't misunderstand me. They hunt, they shoot, they have a good time, but he said, we don't have any issues with background checks.
Right.
He said if we're trying to do background checks on people who may be mentally challenged or they have all kind of criminal background, if you're complaining about it, he said, then I'm going to assume that you're mentally challenged or you got a criminal background.
Yeah.
You have no reason not to accept a background check.
Yeah.
Ever.
I had a conversation with someone in Texas about that and asked him about that, and because he's a Second Amendment guy, he supports background checks, and he said that a lot of the people who oppose it feel that it's a slippery slope. Their argument is that it's going to go from background checks to limiting the types of guns you can have, to limiting the ammo you can have, to suddenly your Second Amendment rights are under attack.
I'll admit it, it's rare that I agree with Whoopi on anything, but I do agree with background checks. And background checks are required now for most sales. They're only not required for private person to private person sales in some states. And most people are willing to make all sales require a background check.
Donald Jr. believes that not only should everybody have a gun, but they should all have a silencer on their guns. Now, if you're at the airport and you're on level 2 and there's a gunfight on level 1, you should be able to hear that so that you can get the hell out of there. So on top of all this, they want to put a silencer on. Now that is when you shoot someone to kill somebody and you don't want anybody to hear you.
You obviously have no idea how a silencer or suppressor works. A silencer, contrary to the name, does not make a gun silent. It's still very loud noise. It just disguises the sound of the gunshot and makes it quieter so it doesn't damage your hearing. You can still hear a silenced gun at a distance. It just won't sound like the average gunshot. Silencers aren't put onto firearms for the sole purpose of not being detected when killing someone. They're put on the end of a gun to protect the hearing of the shooter. My wife's home defense rifle is an AR, which is a very easy and simple to use weapon, but it's also a very loud weapon if not silenced. And for anyone who's ever fired a rifle indoors, they know that the already loud noise is magnified by a concealed space. If my wife were to fire that rifle indoors without a silencer, it would definitely damage her hearing. The silencer on the end of my wife's rifle is not so she can kill people, it's so she can defend my family without causing permanent damage to her and my kids' hearing.
But there are a lot of issues that if people come at you the right way, you know, if it was about, hey, what can I do to help Chicago?
Yes.
Can I help you?
Yes.
As opposed to, you know, I don't like what you said, so I'm going to mess with you on Twitter. That's not the way to go. Now I know a lot of people love him. They love what he does. They love what he says. But you know, when you hear a lie, I believe everybody's parents said to them, don't lie.
Yes.
If you hear a lie, recognize
You know
a lie.
what?
He said,
He says that there were 228 shootings in 2017 and 42 killings, up 24% from 2016.
which was?
That is true.
He did not lie. He demonstrated to you with facts and statistics that Chicago's policy of gun control is not reducing gun violence, but in fact is increasing it. And your guest just pointed this out to you. The regressive left, like Whoopi, don't care about facts because they don't reason with facts, they reason with emotions. They don't want to blame people and their choices and a culture that develops people that make those choices. Instead, they wanted to blame the tool that people use to harm people. It makes no more sense to blame a knife or a hammer instead of the person who uses the knife or the hammer to kill someone. You can't confiscate everything that could be used as a weapon. Even cars and trucks have been proven recently to be very effective weapons. You wouldn't argue to restrict access to knives, hammers, and vehicles to any legal resident, so why would you restrict access to firearms to people who are not criminals and who are mentally stable? Quote-unquote assault rifles make up only 2% of the weapons used in murders in the United States, half as many as the people who are killed using their bare hands, and 1/5 as many as people using knives. In America, we have over 50 million firearms and 14 million concealed carry permit holders who are all people who have passed background checks and are legal to carry firearms where they go. With all these guns and all these people carrying guns, if what the left believed was true and that weapons are so dangerous, then we should be living in a war zone, but we don't, because it's proven that concealed carry permit holders are 14 times less likely to commit a crime. Nearly all firearm murders are committed with illegally possessed firearms. And on the other hand, every year, hundreds of times, legally owned firearms are used in defense to stop a violent crime. Right about now in a debate, a leftist would say, well, there's 93 people killed with firearms every single day. We gotta do something to stop that. And when they say that, please calmly respond saying that 2/3 of that number is suicides. And someone else using their legally owned firearm to kill themselves is not a reason why I should not have a firearm to defend myself. And then remind them that this number also includes people defending themselves against criminals, and that the rest of the number is criminals using illegal firearms. And then remind them it's not a firearm going out by itself and killing people. Remind them behind every one of those guns that was used in a firearm-related murder, there is a deranged person who was going to choose to go out and kill someone whether or not he had a gun. Remind them the tool was not broken, the tool was not evil, the person behind the tool was broken and evil. And right about this time in the discussion, the regressive leftists, just like Whoopi, will call you a liar, because none of these facts matter to them. The only thing that matters to them is their feelings. And what it comes down to is they feel like we should not have firearms to defend ourselves at all, which brings us back to the fundamental question that I mentioned earlier. Why do we have firearms, and should it be a right that we have firearms? The reason why we have the right to bear arms written into our Constitution by our founding fathers is because they just fought a war against a tyrannical government that tried to disarm them so they couldn't win their own freedom. This has been a reoccurring theme all throughout history. Every government that would like to become tyrannical must first disarm their populace. The Ottoman Turks in 1911 disarmed their Armenians, and in 1915 to 1917 they killed 1.5 million of them. In 1929, the Soviet Union disarmed the anti-communist and anti-Stalinist, and between 1929 and 1953 killed 20 million of them. And I already told you about the Nazis. Between 1933 and 1945, they disarmed and killed 13 million people, mostly Jews. China disarmed and killed 20 million. Even in America, after slavery was abolished, in the South, laws were passed to prevent black men from owning firearms. This was done for the sole purpose of preventing black men from being able to fight for equal treatment and equal protection under the law. So to put it simply, the reason why we have the right to bear arms is for two reasons. The first reason is to keep the government in check so it does not become a tyrannical government, and if it does become a tyrannical government, so that the people can overthrow it. So you should be very wary of any government leader who wishes to remove this right from you. The second reason is everyone has the responsibility to defend their own lives, and everyone should be allowed to have the same tools with which to defend their lives. It is not the government's responsibility to defend you, and if it were, they do a terrible job at it. And firearms give everyone the equal opportunity and the equal capability to defend themselves. I could read you all the facts and figures in the world, but it doesn't matter. You either do or do not believe those two things. The regressive left does not think we should have the power and the tools to overthrow a tyrannical government, and they do not believe we have the right to kill in the defense of our own lives. You see this same perspective when it comes to fighting the war on terror. They believe we should not be killing them, but we should not blame the terrorists for killing us. And we will never be able to convince them of anything different because of the answers they have to those two fundamental questions. The only hope we have is to teach the next generation the value of gun ownership and why we have these rights. The only way to combat stupidity is with education. Direwolf, out.